seems like such a small thing, just a simple good night before drifting into sleep. And yet, what if those two words held more power than we ever realized? What if the last message we received before closing our eyes wasn't just a polite gesture, but a subtle force shaping our thoughts, emotions, and even the chemistry of our brains? We assume that consciousness fades the moment we enter sleep, that words spoken before bedtime dissolve into nothingness. But the truth is far stranger. The mind never truly sleeps. Even as the body slows down, even as the conscious self dissolves into dreams, the subconscious remains awake, absorbing, processing, rewiring. What if the final words we hear before surrendering to the night are the very thoughts that define us when we wake? There is science behind this. Studies in neuropsychology suggest that the pre-sleep period is one of the most critical windows of mental programming. The brain enters a liminal state, somewhere between wakefulness and deep sleep, where neural pathways remain highly plastic, meaning they are more open to reinforcement, suggestion, and emotional imprinting. This is why children who fall asleep after hearing comforting words from their parents tend to develop stronger emotional security. This is why unresolved conflicts before bedtime can lead to restless sleep and anxious awakenings. And this is why, throughout history, cultures have placed a mystical significance on the final thoughts carried into slumber. The ancient Greeks believed that the mind, unchained by the body, traveled beyond the material world at night, returning each morning slightly altered by unseen forces. Today, we call it cognitive restructuring, but the essence remains the same. What we hear before sleep lingers within us far longer than we suspect. Imagine this. You receive a message from someone you love just as you're about to sleep. A simple phrase, something like, "Good night, sleep well," or maybe something deeper, "I believe in you, tomorrow is yours." You read it, smile, and close your eyes. You don't realize it, but your brain is replaying those words, embedding them into the subconscious fabric of your mind. And when you wake up, you feel a little lighter, a little more capable, without ever questioning why. Now consider the opposite. The last message you receive is cold, dismissive, or worse. An argument left unresolved. You put your phone down, but the words echo, reshaping the emotional climate of your sleep. You wake up feeling tense, drained, not because of a conscious decision, but because your subconscious spent the night wrestling with unresolved emotion. Which version of the night would you rather have? The contradiction is this. We often think of good night as an ending, when in reality, it is a beginning. It is the first step into an 8-hour journey where the mind continues to evolve. Sleep is not passive. It is a state of transformation. The cells in the brain detoxify, memories consolidate, emotional wounds either heal or deepen. If words can make us laugh, cry, or feel loved while awake, why would they lose their power simply because we've closed our eyes? In fact, their power may increase. In the dark, with no distractions, the mind is left alone with whatever it was last fed. So the real question is, what are we choosing to nourish it with? Some will say this is sentimental nonsense, that words are fleeting and forgotten by morning. But the science of sleep psychology says otherwise. Studies on positive reinforcement before sleep show that people who are exposed to affirmations, calming words, or expressions of love before bed experience lower cortisol levels, deeper REM cycles, and improved mood upon waking. In contrast, stress-inducing stimuli, arguments, negative self-talk, or unsettling messages trigger fragmented sleep cycles, leaving the mind exhausted before the day has even begun. This is why bedtime rituals exist. It's why lullabies work. It's why a single goodnight message can be an anchor of stability in an unpredictable world. But here's where everything falls apart. If words hold this much influence, if the last thoughts before sleep shape the emotional landscape of our waking hours, then why do we treat them so carelessly? Why do we rush our good nights, leave messages unread, or allow the day's unresolved tensions to follow us into sleep? Perhaps the problem isn't that we don't believe in their power, it's that we underestimate how fragile we really are. We assume we can absorb negativity at night and wake up unaffected, that words disappear when the lights go out. But nothing disappears in the subconscious. The mind remembers everything, even the things we choose to ignore. And so, the next time you send or receive a goodnight message, pause for just a second longer. Understand that it is not a small thing. It is not just an ending. It is a doorway, a whispered truth that will follow someone, maybe you, maybe someone you love, into the most V. You hear a debate, a heated discussion between two people passionately arguing their points. Then, suddenly, one of them stops mid-sentence and walks away. No conclusion, no resolution. You find yourself frustrated, unable to stop thinking about it, even though it had nothing to do with you. This is the unfinished argument effect, a psychological phenomenon that makes open-ended conflicts, unresolved discussions, and lingering doubts far more powerful than complete ideas. But why does this happen? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the way our minds are wired? Psychologists have long studied the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for people to remember incomplete tasks more than finished ones. It explains why cliffhangers keep us binge-watching, why unfinished songs loop in our heads, and why an unsent message haunts us more than one we regret sending. But when it comes to arguments, beliefs, and intellectual debates, something deeper is at play. When a debate is left unresolved, it doesn't just linger in memory. It transforms into an itch, an invisible force that compels us to seek answers, even when none exist. This isn't just a quirk of human thought. It's a fundamental aspect of cognition that shapes our decisions, fuels misinformation, and even influences political movements. Imagine scrolling through social media. You come across a post that contradicts everything you believe. You're about to type a reply, but before you can, the post disappears. The discussion is over before it even began. And yet, hours later, you find yourself mentally drafting responses, constructing arguments, revisiting points in your mind. The debate never even happened, but in your head, it's still unfolding. This is the power of unfinished arguments. They demand completion. Our minds are wired to seek closure, and when we don't get it, we create it ourselves. Now consider this. What if some of history's most influential ideas were only powerful because they were left unresolved? The question of free will versus determinism, the nature of consciousness, the existence of God. These are debates that have never reached a final answer. And yet, their very incompleteness has made them immortal. If a philosopher had once proven, beyond a doubt, that free will was an illusion, would people still be debating it today? Or is the endless uncertainty what keeps these ideas alive? The most persistent intellectual struggles in human history are not the ones with clear answers, but the ones that remain eternally open-ended. This contradiction reveals something unsettling about human nature. We don't just crave answers. We crave the pursuit of answers. When something is left unresolved, we keep chasing it, convinced that if we just had one more argument, one more piece of evidence, one more discussion, we'd finally reach the truth. But what if this cycle never ends? What if some questions are unsolvable, not because they lack answers, but because their power lies in their incompleteness? Think of conspiracy theories. Many thrive on the very fact that they can never be fully disproven. A theory that has a clear refutation dies quickly, but a theory that always has one missing piece remains alive forever. The moment an argument is truly finished, its psychological grip weakens. This is why the strongest ideologies are not the ones that claim to be right, but the ones that suggest there's more they're not telling you. It keeps people searching, thinking, doubting. The uncertainty is the fuel. But here's where everything falls apart. If our minds are wired to seek closure, but we're also drawn to uncertainty, what does this mean for truth itself? If the most enduring arguments are the ones that never get resolved, does that mean truth is inherently fragile? Could it be that the ideas we obsess over the most aren't the ones that are true, but the ones that are incomplete? And if that's the case, what happens when someone deliberately leaves an argument unfinished? Could this be the secret behind propaganda, manipulation, and influence? What if the most effective way to control a person's thoughts isn't to tell them what to believe, but to make them believe they're just one step away from figuring it out themselves? So now, the real question isn't just about unfinished arguments. It's about whether we are ever truly in control of our own thoughts. Because if our minds can be hijacked by mere incompleteness, then what does that say about the beliefs we hold most dear? Are they truly ours? Or are they just open-ended loops we've been trapped inside, still searching for a final answer that may never come? You stand in the same place they left you, but their voice is still here, whispering, haunting, refusing to be forgotten. Last words should be nothing more than sound waves dissipating into the air, yet they remain, louder than any moment that came before them. We assume that words die the moment they are spoken, but what if some never do? What if instead they become embedded in time itself, looping endlessly in the recesses of the mind, like an echo trapped between the walls of memory? Perhaps it is not the words themselves that hold power, but the finality they carry, the knowing that there will be no more after them. The last words of a lover are unlike any others. They are not mere sentences, not just syllables and breath. They are a mirror, reflecting back everything that came before them and everything that will come after. Science tells us that the brain clings to endings with an almost obsessive intensity, a psychological phenomenon known as the recency effect. The human mind, desperate for closure, assigns disproportionate weight to the final words spoken, cementing them as absolute truth, even when they may have been spoken in haste, anger, or sorrow. But beyond science, beyond logic, lies something deeper, the inescapable gravity of meaning. Love is fragile, yet its echoes are indestructible. The moment love ends, words become relics, artifacts preserved in the museum of what was. And what was can feel more real than what is. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that their face has blurred, their touch has faded, but their last words remain clear and sharp, slicing through time like a knife. Would it change how you see your past? Would it alter your understanding of what was real and what was illusion? History has always been shaped by the weight of final words, letters written in candlelight before the ink dried, whispered confessions moments before breath was lost. But in a world where voices can be recorded and replayed, where texts can be read over and over, do last words hold the same sacred finality they once did? Or have we stripped them of their magic, turning them into nothing more than an archive of moments that refuse to rest? And yet, for all their weight, last words carry an unbearable contradiction. We seek meaning in them, but what if they were never meant to be profound? What if they were casual, accidental, or spoken in a moment of exhaustion, completely detached from the grand significance we assign to them? A simple goodbye or take care could hold the weight of eternity when spoken by the right person at the wrong moment. A cruel remark uttered in frustration might overshadow a lifetime of kindness. A declaration of love, spoken too late, might become an unbearable ghost. The irony is that words, once spoken, are no longer owned by the one who said them. They belong to the listener, to the mind that replays them, to the heart that refuses to let them fade. And so, last words are never truly about the one who spoke them. They are about the one who remains to hear them. But here's where everything falls apart. What if last words aren't actually words at all? What if silence is the most deafening echo of all? A relationship that ends without a goodbye, a love that vanishes without explanation. These are the absences that weigh heavier than any spoken syllable. Silence, in its vast emptiness, forces the mind to fill in the gaps, to construct meaning where none was given, to create stories in place of certainty. And what is more haunting than a story that was never finished? The real paradox is that words can be rewritten, reinterpreted, reimagined. Silence is absolute. Silence leaves nothing to hold on to, and yet it holds on to you. And still, even if we forget the words themselves, the feeling they left behind never fades. Neuroscience tells us that memories are malleable, that every time we recall something, we alter it slightly. What we remember today is not the same as what we remembered yesterday. So then, if last words are nothing more than unstable recollections, does that make them any less real? Or does their very impermanence prove their power? Maybe it is not the words that linger, but the space they once filled. Maybe it is not the sound, but the silence that followed, stretching into eternity. Perhaps last words don't belong to the one who speaks them, but to the one who listens. Perhaps they are not echoes at all, but mirrors, reflecting not the truth of the past, but the longings of the present. And if a voice can outlast the one who spoke it, does that mean love itself is immortal? Or is love merely an echo, growing fainter, stretching further, until, one day, it disappears completely? But what if words were never meant to be permanent? What if the real power lies in forgetting? You make a choice, believing it's your own. But was it ever truly yours to make? The sensation of control, of free will, is comforting. You think, you decide, you act. And yet, beneath every action, there's an unseen force, an echo, a whisper from the past. Every decision you make, every instinct you follow, has roots buried deep in forgotten histories, in the lives of those who came before you. It's in the way your ancestors survived, the stories they told, the fears they carried. Even the language you think in, the concepts you believe are yours, were whispered into existence long before you took your first breath. The past is not a thing we leave behind. It is a ghost that lingers, shaping our every move without us ever realizing it. We assume that history is just a record of things that happened, a linear progression of events catalogued in books and preserved in archives. But history is not a dead thing. It breathes within us. Science tells us that trauma can be passed through generations, imprinted in DNA, altering not just our minds, but our very biology. The famine your great-grandparents endured might be why you crave food in times of stress. The wars they survived might explain your fear of loud noises. Psychology confirms it. Unconscious biases, cultural narratives, inherited beliefs, all operate beneath the surface, steering our lives like invisible hands on a ship. And yet, we rarely stop to ask, if the past is always with us, are we ever truly free from it? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every major decision in your life had already been set in motion by events that occurred centuries before you were born. That your name, your career, your deepest fears were nothing more than ripples of a stone thrown into the water long before your time. What if an ancient civilization had already uncovered the key to human nature, and we are merely following a script written long ago? History is cyclical, they say. Empires rise and fall, cultures thrive and disappear. The same mistakes are made over and over again. But why? Is it that we fail to learn? Or is there something more, an unseen pattern, a gravitational pull from the past that we cannot escape? And then comes the paradox. If the past shapes the present and the present shapes the future, does that mean the future is already written? If the whispers of history dictate our thoughts and actions, is free will just an illusion? Philosophers have long debated this, whether we are the authors of our fate or mere echoes of decisions made long ago. Some argue that awareness grants us power, that by understanding the patterns of the past, we can break free. But is it truly possible to escape something so deeply embedded within us? Even when we think we are rebelling against history, are we not just acting within the parameters it has set for us? But here's where everything falls apart. What if the past isn't as real as we think? Memory is flawed, rewritten every time we recall it. The historical record is incomplete, riddled with bias, shaped by the victors. What we believe to be true about history is often nothing more than a story crafted by those who had the power to tell it. And yet, despite its imperfections, the past continues to influence our future. The ghost persists, even when its voice is distorted. We cling to tradition, to inherited fears and ancient grudges, often without questioning why. How many of our deepest held beliefs would dissolve if we realized they were merely echoes of someone else's voice? Which brings us to the real problem. If this is true, why can't we see it? The mind resists. It clings to the illusion of autonomy. We don't want to believe that our thoughts are shaped by forgotten decisions, that the ghosts of history are whispering in our ears. But perhaps the greatest trick the past ever played was convincing us that we had moved beyond it. It lives in the margins of our consciousness, in the instincts we cannot explain, in the myths we unknowingly perpetuate. We believe we are modern, rational, independent. And yet, in the quiet moments of decision-making, in the subtle pull of déjà vu, in the strange comfort of the familiar, the past reminds us. It has never truly left. Perhaps history isn't just something we study. It's something that watches us, waiting for its moment to return. You think you notice when something ends, but the most profound goodbyes don't announce themselves. They slip away quietly, unnoticed, until one day you realize they were never truly there. You search for a moment, a defining event, some kind of final punctuation that signals the end. But instead, you find only silence, an absence that was always creeping in, long before you were ready to see it. Goodbyes are not as sudden as we like to believe. Neuroscience tells us that the brain struggles to register slow loss, preferring stark contrasts over gradual fades. A friend who once felt like a permanent part of your life drifts away, but there was no single day that marked their departure. The bond was not severed in an instant, but dissolved over time, slipping between unnoticed moments. This isn't just about people. Relationships, habits, even eras of our lives dissolve silently while we remain unaware. What if we never truly say goodbye, but rather, we wake up one day and find ourselves in a different place than where we started? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that someone who once mattered deeply to you is now just a memory, faded like an old photograph. At what point did the goodbye happen? Was it the last time you spoke? The last time they crossed your mind? Or did it happen long before either of you acknowledged it? Perhaps goodbyes don't require words at all. Perhaps the most powerful departures occur in the spaces between conversation, in the quiet understanding that lingers unspoken. History, too, is filled with silent goodbyes. Civilizations have disappeared not with grand, dramatic collapses, but with a slow erosion of time. The libraries of Alexandria didn't burn in a single night. Knowledge was lost in pieces, across decades, before anyone realized it was slipping away. Even in personal history, the people who once defined us often become ghosts in our memories, not through any definitive moment, but through time's quiet, relentless work. If we believe that every departure should have a ceremony, a definitive ending, then why do the most impactful ones so often go unnoticed? The contradiction of closure lies in its illusion. We chase it because we believe it will give us peace, but true closure is a myth. The most significant endings don't happen in a way we can neatly categorize. They happen in the pauses, in the moments of hesitation, in the quiet recognition that something has already changed. The hardest goodbyes are not the ones that are spoken, but the ones that are simply understood. But what if the most painful part of a silent goodbye isn't its absence, but the realization that it was never truly needed? What if we are not meant to cling to the idea of finality, but instead to accept that everything is always shifting, always fading into something else? If goodbyes require acknowledgement, then what happens when no one realizes they occurred? If a departure is only felt in retrospect, was it ever truly a moment in time, or just an unfolding of what was inevitable? And so, we find ourselves in an endless cycle, seeking closure where none exists, searching for endings that have already passed us by. Perhaps the greatest illusion of all is not the goodbye itself, but the belief that anything ever truly ends. Because if everything fades in silence, then maybe nothing is ever truly gone. And if you think loss is the only thing that disappears unnoticed, wait until you hear about the way memories rewrite themselves without us even realizing it. You wake up, gasping for breath. The echo of a voice, soft, distant, yet unmistakable, clings to the edges of your consciousness. The words are familiar, but their origin escapes you. Were they spoken in a dream, or do they belong to someone who has long since vanished? Last words, final utterances before the void swallows the speaker, seem to possess an eerie persistence. Some claim they reverberate in the subconscious, resurfacing in dreams as whispers from the past. Others believe they hold no power at all, that memory simply plays cruel tricks. But what if the truth is far stranger? What if last words are more than remnants of thought? What if they imprint themselves onto the architecture of the mind, existing in ways we've yet to understand? Neuroscience tells us that dreams are built from fragments, experiences, fears, emotions, and perhaps the voices of the departed. When a person speaks their final words, they become frozen in time, unalterable, immune to reinterpretation. Unlike memories that evolve with retelling, last words remain fixed, unchanged. This permanence gives them a unique power. The mind, a labyrinth of unresolved emotions and unprocessed grief, may replay them endlessly, searching for meaning. But are these echoes merely psychological phenomena, or do they signify something deeper? Some have reported hearing voices of lost loved ones in their dreams, not as memories, but as if they were still speaking, still aware. Could last words transcend death, embedding themselves into the subconscious in ways we have yet to explain? Imagine this. You are standing in an empty house, dust settling in the silence. A voice calls your name, someone you once knew, someone long gone. The dream feels real, the presence undeniable. But what if it's not just a dream? What if certain words, spoken in those final moments, act as doorways rather than mere echoes? If consciousness is not as linear as we believe, could these words be reaching through time itself? Some scientists speculate that the brain, in heightened emotional states, encodes memories differently. Perhaps final words leave a deeper imprint, one that transcends ordinary recollection. If so, are dreams merely a reflection of the mind? Or could they be something more? A space where unspoken thoughts, unfinished goodbyes, and unfulfilled promises still linger. We assume dreams are personal, confined to the realm of individual perception. But what if they are shared? Consider the stories of people across cultures who have reported hearing the same words in their sleep, uttered by those long deceased. Could last words form a kind of psychological resonance, a shared experience passed down in ways we can't yet measure? If so, what does this mean for the nature of consciousness? Could it imply that our final words are not truly final, that they persist somewhere beyond our waking reality? The unsettling question remains. Do last words linger because we remember them, or because they refuse to be forgotten? If dreams are the mind's attempt to reconcile the unresolved, then perhaps these words persist because they are unfinished stories, messages that seek to be heard beyond the threshold of death. And if they do, if they whisper through the fabric of sleep, then maybe last words are not an ending, but a continuation. So tonight, as you drift into dreams, listen closely. A voice may call out to you, not from memory, not from longing, but from somewhere else. And the real question is, will you recognize it? You close your eyes, expecting silence. Instead, your mind floods with questions, unfinished thoughts, and fragments of conversations you had years ago. The more you try to sleep, the more awake you feel. It's as if your brain has chosen this precise moment to analyze every mistake, rehearse imaginary scenarios, and question every choice you've ever made. But why does this happen? Why does overthinking strike hardest when all you need is rest? The answer lies in the very nature of your brain. At night, when external distractions fade, your default mode network, DMN, the system responsible for self-reflection and daydreaming, becomes hyperactive. Instead of shutting down, your mind shifts into a relentless loop of analyzing past events and predicting future outcomes. It convinces you that if you just think long enough, you'll solve everything. But this is an illusion. Overthinking doesn't lead to clarity, it leads to mental exhaustion, as if your brain is running in place, burning energy without moving forward. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Thousands of years ago, humans had to remain alert at night to avoid potential threats. Those who worried about dangers lurking in the dark were more likely to survive. But in the modern world, this survival mechanism works against us. Our threats aren't wild animals or enemy tribes. They're social anxieties, regrets, and the weight of unmade decisions. The same hyper-awareness that once kept us alive now hijacks our peace of mind.
Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every thought you had at night was an illusion, mere background noise, with no real impact on your future. Would you still give them so much power? Or consider this, if overthinking were truly productive, wouldn't you have solved all your problems by now? Instead, the same worries return night after night, disguised as something new but fundamentally unchanged. The truth is, overthinking is not about finding answers. It's about the illusion of control, the desperate attempt to hold on to certainty in an uncertain world. This is where the contradiction deepens. The more you struggle to control your thoughts, the more powerful they become. Trying to suppress them only reinforces their presence, like pressing down on a spring only to have it bounce back with greater force. The mind's paradox is that the harder you fight unwanted thoughts, the more you feed them. Neuroscientists call this ironic process theory, the tendency of the brain to focus on what it tries to ignore. Tell yourself not to think about something, and it becomes the only thing you can think about. But here's the real paradox. Your brain thinks it's protecting you when in reality, it's draining you. Overthinking isn't making you safer, it's making you weaker, leaving you mentally fatigued before the day even begins. And yet the solution isn't to force yourself to stop thinking. That would be like trying to calm water by slamming it with your hands. The key is to shift your relationship with these thoughts. Instead of battling them, let them pass. Acknowledge them without engagement. Realize that you are not your thoughts, you are simply the observer. Perhaps sleep isn't about shutting off. Perhaps it's about surrendering to the unknown, trusting that not every thought needs an answer, trusting that the world won't collapse if you simply let go. And if overthinking at night is this powerful, wait until you see how your mind creates entire false memories, without you even realizing it. Because sometimes, the things we remember the clearest are the things that never happened at all. A single message sent, unread, lingering in the void, an unfinished thought that could change everything. But does it really matter? The moment you press send, the message is out of your hands, absorbed into the digital abyss where it either reaches its destination or drowns in silence. And yet, something about the last text, the one never responded to, the one left unanswered, clings to the mind with an eerie weight. It is no longer just words on a screen. It becomes a ghost, an echo of an unresolved conversation, an unspoken confession, a moment frozen in time. Perhaps it is because humans crave closure, the assurance that every sentence meets its intended ears, that every thought finds its counterpoint. But what if closure is a myth? What if the last text is not just a fragment of a conversation left unfinished, but a testament to the illusion of control we think we have over our narratives? There is something unsettling about an unread message, as though it exists in a liminal space, neither fully delivered, nor completely lost. Science tells us that the brain hates incompleteness. The zygonic effect, the tendency to remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones, ensnares us, forcing our minds to loop around the untans, searching for resolution that may never come. It is the same mechanism that makes cliffhangers so compelling, that keeps stories alive in our thoughts long after they've ended. But when it comes to personal interactions, the effect intensifies. An unanswered text is not just an interruption, it is a question that lingers in the subconscious, feeding self-doubt, regret, and speculation. Did they ignore it? Did they forget? Did something happen? The modern age has given us an infinite number of ways to communicate, yet it has also amplified the paranoia of silence. Imagine, for a moment, that every unsent message exists in a parallel reality, an alternate timeline, where the words you hesitated to send were delivered, where the texts that never reached their recipient played out to completion. Would the outcome of your life be different? Would the course of your relationships shift in ways you never imagined? We assume that words exchanged digitally are trivial, mere pixels floating in cyberspace. But what if they shape reality more than we realize? A message never read is a path never taken, a moment that never unfolds. And yet, the illusion of control deceives us into believing that had the text been received, had it been answered, things would have been different. Perhaps they wouldn't have been. Perhaps the unread message is not a lost opportunity, but a mirror reflecting a truth we refuse to see, that some things are meant to remain unfinished. But here's where everything falls apart. If a single text message can hold such emotional weight, does it mean we have given too much power to digital communication? The paradox is undeniable. While technology has bridged distances, it has also created new chasms of uncertainty. 100 years ago, a letter lost in transit would have been forgotten, chalked up to fate. Today, the absence of a reply is not just a missing response, it is an existential dilemma. The anxiety of waiting for a response has become a universal human experience, one that transcends culture and language. We have engineered instant communication, yet we remain trapped in the slow agony of uncertainty. And what does that say about us? If our emotions can be hijacked by the presence or absence of a simple notification, have we truly advanced, or have we merely built new cages for ourselves? And yet, despite everything, one question remains unanswered. Does the last text define the relationship, or does the relationship define the last text? If words left unread can haunt us, does that mean they carry an intrinsic weight, or is it we who imbue them with meaning? Perhaps the real curse of the last text is not that it lingers unanswered, but that we believe it ever needed an answer at all. Perhaps the unfinished, the unresolved, the unspoken, all of it, is precisely what keeps life moving forward. And if that is true, then maybe, just maybe, the last text is not a curse. Maybe it is freedom. You make a promise, believing it's yours to keep. But what if that promise, once spoken, no longer belongs to you? What if it latches onto your soul, not as a choice but as an obligation, binding you to an invisible force stronger than your own will? Some say a final promise is nothing more than words, fleeting and malleable. Others know better. They've felt its weight, the suffocating grip of commitment that turns time itself into a trap. And the real question isn't whether a promise matters, it's whether we ever had the power to break one at all. The human brain treats a promise differently than a casual statement. Neuroscientists have found that the act of making a promise activates not just areas responsible for decision-making, but also those tied to long-term emotional commitment and guilt. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, battles against the limbic system, which clings to emotional bonds. This is why breaking a promise, especially a final one, doesn't just feel like a mistake, it feels like a betrayal of our own identity. But is that all? Or is there something even deeper, something hidden beneath the layers of psychology and social conditioning? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every promise you've ever made was permanently etched into reality, unchangeable, unbreakable. Would you be more careful with your words? Would you rethink those casual agreements, the whispered assurances, the declarations of forever that seem so easy to say? What if promises weren't just psychological constructs, but tangible laws of the universe, as real as gravity? Some philosophers argue that in many ways they already are. The moment we utter a final promise, we change the trajectory of our future, reshaping the choices we believe are still ours to make. But here's where everything unravels. If promises hold such immense power, why do we break them? Why does a person swear loyalty only to betray, vow love only to walk away, swear to keep a secret only to reveal it in whispers? The contradiction is built into us, an evolutionary tension between stability and survival. Societies thrive on commitment, yet individuals evolve through adaptation. And so, we live in the paradox of promising permanence in a world designed for change. And yet, despite everything, one question remains unanswered. Does breaking a promise truly free us, or does it imprison us even further? Some would argue that the weight of a broken promise never really disappears. It lingers, reshaping our perception of ourselves, altering how we trust and are trusted in return. The psychological burden of knowing we've severed a bond often outweighs the relief of escape. Perhaps, in the end, the real prison isn't the promise itself, but the knowledge that we were once capable of keeping it, and chose not to. So if a final promise shapes our reality, dictates our conscience, and alters our very sense of self, what happens when we stop making them altogether? If no one promised, if no one committed, would we be freer, or would we be lost, unanchored in a world where nothing is certain, and no words hold weight? And if you think this question is unsettling, wait until you consider the next one. What if the most dangerous promises aren't the ones we make to others, but the ones we make to ourselves? The more we seek the truth, the more we become blind to the lies that built it. You hear a story, one that shapes your world, a historical event, a personal belief, a scientific fact. You trust it, live by it. But what if right now you discovered it was a lie all along? Not just an ordinary lie, but one so deeply woven into the fabric of reality that it has become indistinguishable from the truth itself. Imagine if, centuries ago, someone fabricated a fact so convincingly that it became the foundation for everything that followed. It's a king who never existed, a battle that was never fought, a law of physics that was merely an illusion. Over time, people believed, they built upon it, studied it, defended it. The lie grew stronger, cemented by scholars, history books, and scientific consensus. And then, it was no longer a lie. It had transformed, evolved, adapted into something irrefutable. Reality itself had conformed. Truth is not static. Science, history, and even our memories evolve through deception. The Mandela effect, millions of people remembering events differently than recorded history, suggests that our collective reality may not be as firm as we assume. Historians rewrite the past with every new discovery, but what happens when they rewrite it based on something that never existed? Governments have erased entire figures from existence, scientists have dismissed ideas later proven true, and religions have built doctrines on interpretations that shift with time. What then is the real difference between truth and belief? If an entire civilization accepts a lie as fact, does it still remain a lie? If no evidence exists to contradict it, does that mean it is now real? Imagine waking up in a world where the history books tell a completely different story than you remember. You recall a leader who never lived, an event that never happened, a war that was won but is now recorded as lost. You search for proof, for remnants of the past as you know it, but everything, every document, every news article, every conversation tells you that you are wrong. Would you trust yourself or the reality presented before you? If a lie is reinforced long enough, repeated often enough, and accepted by enough people, does it not shape the world just as powerfully as any truth? But here is where everything falls apart. If truth itself is built upon layers of deception, then what does it mean to know something? Can we ever truly separate fiction from reality when human perception is flawed? What if everything we consider an absolute truth, gravity, time, even our own memories, was simply the most convincing explanation of the moment? If a lie is indistinguishable from reality, then does reality even exist? The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once suggested that there are no facts, only interpretations. What if history, science, and even personal experience are nothing more than the most widely accepted interpretations? We assume that truth must always come to light, but history has shown us otherwise. There are ideas that have been buried, facts erased, stories rewritten so thoroughly that no one will ever know they were lies to begin with. If an idea can be forgotten, erased from memory, and from record, then did it ever exist? And if the opposite is true, if something never happened but is believed to have happened, then has it now become real? And if our world is built on layers of deception, what happens when the final layer crumbles? If we were to strip away every assumption, every belief, and every story we've been told, would we be left with something real or with nothing at all? You wake up in the dead of night. The room is silent, the world still, and yet, a whisper lingers in the air. Soft, familiar, impossible. You recognize the voice, but that's the problem. It belongs to someone who no longer walks among the living. A fleeting moment of denial rushes through your mind. It must have been the wind, a trick of exhaustion, the distant hum of the city. But then, it happens again. Clearer this time. It calls your name. Your heart pounds against your ribs. A primal instinct kicking in. Rationality tells you to dismiss it. But a deeper, unshakable part of you wonders. What if the dead never truly leave? Science offers a simple answer. Auditory hallucinations. The mind in its labyrinth of grief often replays familiar voices as a coping mechanism. When we lose someone, the echoes of their presence remain imprinted on our subconscious, sometimes surfacing in moments of vulnerability. Neurologists explain it as a glitch in perception, a sensory mirage crafted by memory and longing. But if that were the case, why do so many reports of voices from beyond include unknown information, details the listener could never have fabricated? Why do these experiences transcend culture, time, and belief? Some claim that these voices are not mere constructs of the mind, but rather a phenomenon science has yet to decode. Consider the frequencies of sound, many beyond the range of human perception. Some researchers argue that energy does not simply vanish, it transforms. If consciousness is energy, could it linger in frequencies just beyond our detection? Paranormal investigators have long used electronic voice phenomena, EVP, to capture inexplicable whispers, sounds believed to be messages from spirits. Dismissed by skeptics yet obsessively studied by others, these recordings present an eerie challenge to our understanding of reality. Could the dead be speaking in ways we have yet to fully comprehend? Imagine this. You're walking down an empty street, when a voice calls your name. You turn, expecting someone behind you, but there's no one. It's not the wind, it's not an echo, it's something else. You freeze, uncertainty flooding your mind. If the voice belonged to someone you lost long ago, would you listen? Would you answer? Or would fear take hold, convincing you that you imagined it? This is the paradox we face, the overwhelming desire to connect with those who have passed, clashing against the fear of what it might mean if they can still reach us. Ancient civilizations did not dismiss such experiences. To them, hearing the voices of the departed was not madness, it was a gift. The Egyptians believed the dead communicated through dreams and omens. The Greeks consulted oracles who spoke with spirits. In many cultures, ancestors are still believed to whisper guidance to the living. But in our modern world, we have sterilized death, pushed it out of sight, out of mind. We are told that hearing voices is a malfunction, a psychological error. But what if we've been conditioned to ignore something fundamental? Some who hear these voices speak of messages, warnings, even comfort. Others describe unsettling encounters, whispers that should not exist, words spoken in empty rooms, voices captured on recordings no one remembers speaking. Skeptics argue that our brains, wired to recognize patterns, are simply assembling random noise into something meaningful. Yet, there are documented cases where voices have relayed information the listener could not have possibly known. Could consciousness persist in a way we fail to understand, Or is it merely our own perception filling in the gaps of silence? But here's where the contradiction deepens. If the dead can speak, why do they choose silence most of the time? If they have messages to convey, why do their words come only in fragments, whispers, riddles? What if we've been asking the wrong question? Instead of are the dead speaking, perhaps we should ask, why are only some of us listening? And if they are speaking, what exactly are they trying to say? Perhaps the dead are not lost in silence. Perhaps we are simply deaf to their language. You don't think about your last words until you realize they might be your last. A man lies in his final moments, breath shallow, fingers twitching as if grasping for something long gone. His eyes stare past the walls, past the people at his bedside, past the present itself. Then, with what little strength he has left, he speaks. His voice is weak, barely more than a whisper, but the weight of his words is unbearable. Some last words are regrets, others are secrets, a few are confessions, and sometimes, the worst ones, are the ones never spoken at all. But why? Why in those final moments does the mind wander not toward triumph, not toward joy, but toward the things left undone, the truths left unspoken? Neuroscientists have long studied the phenomenon of the life review, the way the human brain floods itself with memories in the face of impending death. It's not random, it's not a simple playback reel of moments, it's selective. The mind does not show victories, but choices, the things that could have been different, the words that could have been said. This is where guilt begins to take its final form, not as an emotion, but as a realization. That moment, when everything you've locked away, buried beneath years of excuses, suddenly rises to the surface. And at that moment, the truth is no longer about what you did, it's about what you didn't do. So what if, right now, you knew this was your last chance? What would you say? Imagine this. You are lying in bed, breath slow, time slipping from your grasp like sand through an open palm. But suddenly, your mind drags you backward, to the moments you ignored, to the words you swallowed, to the people you let slip away. If you had the strength, would you speak? Would you try to fix what was already broken? Or would you remain silent, accepting that some things can never be undone? History is filled with last words that linger far beyond the people who spoke them. Some are riddles, cryptic messages that leave the living searching for meaning. Others are sharp, cutting through the air like a final act of defiance. Some are desperate, pleading, begging for one last second, one last chance. And some, like the dying words of emperors and criminals alike, are nothing more than a single name, whispered into the void, never explained. Why does the human mind, in its final breath, hold on to the past instead of surrendering to the present? Is it because we fear judgment, or is it something deeper, something we cannot understand until it is too late? But here's where it all unravels. Not every deathbed confession is real. Not every final word is honest. Some are lies, some are manipulations, and some are meaningless, nothing more than the brain's last desperate attempt to make sense of the inevitable. If final words are supposed to reveal the truth, then why do they so often contradict the lives people have lived? A kind man dies with anger in his voice. A cruel man whispers an apology. A devoted friend calls out the name of someone no one knew existed. Perhaps we misunderstand the nature of final words. Perhaps they do not belong to the dying at all. Perhaps they exist only for the living, to haunt them, to shape them, to remind them that in the end, it is never the dead who carry the burden of what was left unsaid. It is us, and maybe that is the real tragedy. Not that we die with regret, but that we live with it. So if the last words we speak have power, then what about the ones we never say? What about the truths locked away inside our minds, the feelings we suppress, the guilt we refuse to acknowledge? And more importantly, what if we don't have to wait until the end to say them? What if the most haunting words are not those whispered on a deathbed, but the ones we are too afraid to say right now? And if that is true, then maybe the real question isn't what you'll say before you die. Maybe the real question is, what are you waiting for? You don't always notice the last time you see someone. There's no warning, no dramatic fade to black, no slow motion exit that gives you time to prepare. One moment, they're in your life, woven into the fabric of your days, a voice in your ear, a presence in your space. The next, they vanish. No explanation, no closure, just an absence that feels heavier than their presence ever did. And somehow, the silence speaks louder than words ever could. Maybe that's the cruelest part of it all. Not the leaving itself, but the way the mind refuses to let go. It replays the moments, rewinds the laughter, pauses on the details you didn't think mattered. What was the last thing they said? Did they know it was goodbye? Were you supposed to? The brain wasn't built to handle unfinished stories. We crave resolution, a sense of finality, a clear-cut ending that allows us to move forward. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect, a strange mental quirk where unfinished emotional experiences linger in our minds longer than the ones with proper closure. It's why songs stuck on a cliffhanger feel incomplete, why a half-told story gnaws at you until you hear the ending. But when the missing piece isn't a song or a story but a person, the mind turns obsessive, searching for answers in places where none exist. And here's the unsettling truth. The pain of their absence is sometimes the only thing keeping them close. But does moving on mean forgetting, or does forgetting mean they never mattered? The contradiction is haunting. We assume that time heals, that memories fade naturally. But the mind works differently when loss is abrupt. Instead of dissolving, memories sharpen. The ordinary details, a text, a laugh, a shared silence, become magnified, distorted, reshaped. The brain reconstructs them, filling in gaps with emotion, rather than fact. You may not even remember them as they were, but as you need them to be. And that's where the real ghost lingers, not in reality, but in perception. Imagine waking up tomorrow, and realizing someone you once loved had simply vanished. No message, no explanation, just an empty space where they used to be. Would you accept it, or would you keep searching, replaying old conversations, looking for a hidden clue you might have missed? But here's the real question. If the mind refuses to let go, does that mean they ever truly left? We assume that goodbyes must be spoken, that departure must be acknowledged for it to be real. But history tells a different story. Some of the most influential figures, the minds that shaped the world, left without a trace, their final moments undocumented, their absences a mystery. What if Leonardo da Vinci had disappeared before his greatest work? What if Nikola Tesla's knowledge had been lost in the void? Would the world still feel their absence the way we do when a loved one vanishes from our personal lives? Or is it only the relationships we attach emotion to that haunt us? Here's where the contradiction deepens. We claim to want closure, but when we get it, it often feels worse. The finality of a proper goodbye forces acceptance, while an unresolved ending keeps the person alive in the mind. Maybe that's why some goodbyes are never spoken. Because the truth is, sometimes the pain of wondering is easier than the pain of knowing. But what if we've been asking the wrong question all along? Maybe it's not about why people leave, but why we struggle to let go. The heart clings to unfinished stories, holding on to hope that an answer will appear, that the missing piece will surface, that somehow, the silence will break. And yet, despite everything, one question remains unanswered. If the mind keeps bringing them back, did they ever really leave? And if you think a sudden goodbye is haunting, just wait until you explore the psychology of déjà vu, where the past and present blur into one, and time itself refuses to let go. The final moments before death are often shrouded in mystery. But what if a person's last words could hold more than just farewell? Imagine someone whispering, "Tomorrow, the world will change," and the very next day, something monumental happens. Coincidence? Or is there something far more unsettling at play? We like to believe that death is an absolute, a clear, defined ending. But what if it's something else? A transition, a moment where time bends, and glimpses of the future slip through the cracks of consciousness. History has its share of eerie final words. Karl Marx dismissed his with, "Last words are for fools who haven't said enough." Meanwhile, the mathematician Évariste Galois, the night before his fatal duel, scribbled an urgent equation, one that later revolutionized algebra. And then there's Edgar Allan Poe, whose last murmurs, "Lord help my poor soul," seem to foreshadow the dark enigma surrounding his death. Are these just the random words of dying minds? Or could there be a pattern? Something science and philosophy have yet to understand. Science tells us that as the body shuts down, the brain experiences a final surge of activity, neural fireworks, a flood of memories, a possible glimpse into something beyond. Could this last spark of awareness be powerful enough to break the constraints of time, allowing some to unknowingly glimpse moments ahead? Some researchers argue that the brain, facing death, enters a state of heightened perception, perhaps even tuning into probabilities that seem absurd to the conscious mind. but eerily accurate in hindsight. Now consider this. If someone's final words hold the power of prediction, does that mean fate is already written? Or could it mean that at the brink of death, the mind gains an untapped ability, a fleeting moment where it accesses truths hidden in the layers of reality? Suppose for a moment that the last words spoken aren't simply reflections of the past, but echoes of a future already set in motion. Imagine a man lying in a hospital bed, eyes barely open, lips moving with effort. His family leans in, expecting a farewell, but instead he mutters, "Watch the water." They think nothing of it, until a week later, an unforeseen flood engulfs their town. Would they then see his words differently? If last words can be predictive, does that mean our thoughts, even in life, are constantly influencing the events ahead of us? Consider the paradox. If someone dies foreseeing the future, are they witnessing something inevitable, or are they setting it into motion, simply by speaking it aloud? Quantum physics presents a strange possibility. That observation itself can alter reality. Could it be that in those final heightened moments, a dying mind collapses possibilities into a single inevitable event, and yet contradictions arise? If last words are glimpses of destiny, why do some die in silence? Why do others speak in riddles that never seem to connect to future events? Perhaps it's not that every dying person sees the future. Perhaps only some do, those whose consciousness is momentarily untethered from time's linear path. Or perhaps last words don't predict the future at all, but instead they create it. But here's where it gets even stranger. What if we've been looking at this the wrong way? What if it's not about what the dying see, but about what the living hear? Maybe, just maybe, we shape our reality around these final words, unintentionally bending the world to fit their meaning. If a man utters, "Beware the storm," do we begin searching for signs of disaster, eventually manifesting one through our collective fear? If last words hold weight, then perhaps they do not reveal the future, they build it. So the real question isn't whether last words predict the future. The real question is, if they did, would we even recognize it? Or would we be too preoccupied with our assumptions to realize that the future had been whispered to us all along? And if you think this idea is unsettling, just wait until you hear about the strange phenomenon of déjà vu, where the past, present and future seem to fold into one. You make a choice, believing it's your own. But was it ever truly yours to make? The moment you picked up this story, an invisible chain of events led you here, decisions so small you never noticed them, yet powerful enough to bring you to this exact moment. You might think you are in control, that your choices define your life. But what if every decision you've ever made was merely an illusion? What if your mind, designed for clarity, was instead a prisoner of infinite possibilities, forever trapped in the endless corridors of what if? It starts with the simplest decisions, choosing a career, a life partner, a city to live in. But the real torment begins afterward, when the mind refuses to settle, whispering, "Was that the right choice? What if I had chosen differently? Would I be happier, more successful, less alone?" And just like that, an alternative reality is born in your mind, one that never existed, but now holds power over the one that does. The what-if syndrome isn't just an overactive imagination, it's a deep-rooted cognitive pattern, a survival mechanism that once kept us safe, but now leaves us restless. Neurologists say that the human brain is wired to simulate possibilities before acting. Ancient survival depended on this. Should we hunt in the valley or the hills? Is that shadow a predator or just the wind? The ability to project different futures kept our ancestors alive. But what happens when a survival instinct outlives its purpose? In today's world, where life is no longer a series of life or death choices, this ability turns against us, trapping us in a maze of imagined alternatives, making us believe we could have controlled the uncontrollable. It isn't just psychology, it's physics too. Quantum mechanics tells us that every possible decision could, theoretically, exist in an alternate reality. Every missed opportunity, every different path, it might not just be a thought in your mind, it could be unfolding somewhere else, in some parallel existence. But if this were true, what does it say about our reality? Are we simply living in one of infinite versions of ourselves, questioning a life that another version of us is living without regret? Imagine this, you wake up one morning and realize that every choice you thought was yours had already been predetermined, not by fate, but by an intricate web of past experiences, subconscious biases, and external influences. Every free will decision, already shaped by memories you barely recall, advertisements you didn't notice, and fears you never questioned. Would you still believe in free will? Or would you begin to wonder whether every decision was merely a story your brain told itself to maintain the illusion of control? Maybe history had already uncovered this dilemma long before science gave it a name. The ancient Stoics believed that regret was a sickness of the mind, an attachment to something that was never real to begin with. They trained themselves to accept the present as the only reality, refusing to entertain thoughts of what if. In contrast, existentialist philosophers argue that the very act of questioning reality is what makes us human. So which is it? Is questioning our choices a flaw to be fixed, or the essence of what it means to be alive? But here's where everything falls apart. What if certainty is the real illusion? We crave the comfort of knowing we've made the right decision, yet every decision leads to new uncertainties. The student who picks a career wonders if they should have chosen another. The lover who walks away questions if they should have stayed. The traveler who moves abroad thinks of the home they left behind, and so we chase certainty, only to find that it doesn't exist. If every possible reality exists in some form, if every different choice leads to a parallel outcome, then does it even matter which path we take? And if it doesn't, why does it feel so impossible to stop questioning? Perhaps the truth isn't about making the right choice, but about letting go of the idea that one perfect path exists at all. So now you sit here, reading these words, wondering, if you had never stumbled upon this story, would your thoughts be different? If this idea had never entered your mind, would you be questioning something else entirely? Maybe none of this is about choice at all. Maybe it's about awareness, the awareness that every path you could have taken is just as real as the one you're on, but the only thing that matters is the one you choose to live in fully. And if that unsettles you, just wait until you realize how deep the illusion of self-awareness goes.